Former Eskom CEO André de Ruyter has left Scopa members unimpressed as he failed to name senior government officials he implicated in alleged corruption at Eskom. He cited legal advice as reasons for this lack of detail. De Ruyter also says he reported the corruption to Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan and National Security Advisor Sydney Mufamadi. For more on this, we're joined this morning by Richard Spoor, who is a public interest lawyer. Richard, great to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. That really is what we wanted to know from De Ruyter yesterday at Scopa, right? He made serious allegations in that television interview, bombshell allegations of the ANC's involvement in corruption at Eskom and an apparent minister that's also been involved at the highest level. What do you make of his refusal to name those names?
Well, clearly Scopa wanted to know if De Ruyter had fulfilled his legal obligations. He had spoken on TV in a TV interview about the corruption and fraud at Eskom. And at the time, there were challenges about whether or not he had, in fact, made proper disclosure, as he's obliged to do under law. And I think that's what Scopa wanted to find out. Have you complied with your legal obligations? I think pretty much along the lines that people attacked the president after the Pala Pala event, where they also said to him, well, did you report this? How did you report this? Because the disclosure of corrupt activities is regulated by a law called PRECA, the Prevention and Combating of Corruption Act. Corrupt Activities Act. And under that law, the head of an institution like Eskom, the CEOs of companies, municipal managers, head of tertiary education, generally senior people in public institutions, have a legal obligation to report corruption, theft, fraud that is significant and exceeds 100,000 rand in value. Now, the Act stipulates that must be reported to the Directorate of Priority Crime Investigation, which is the Hawks. And as I understand from De Ruyter, he's saying, look, I reported it to the head of the South African Police Service. I've reported it to Minister Gordhan and to the Presidential Security Advisor, Sydney Mufamadi. I've done my job. I'm not guilty of failing to report these activities. And what he's doing by being still about the detail is he's saying, I'm protecting my own legal rights. I don't wish to be sued. There were a number of threats made against him by the ANC. And he's also saying, I don't want to prejudice any ongoing investigation by disclosing information in public. He's entitled to do that, but clearly that irked the honourable members.
So, Richard, essentially what you're saying is, do you agree that he's done what he was meant to do insofar as disclosing to the relevant authorities? And those threats by MPs that they will find a way to compel him to name those names are pretty much hollow? André de Ruyter, he's done his duty.
I think he's done his job. I don't think it gets, you can't go higher than the head of the South African Police Services. The minister's concerned, the head of presidential security. I think he's done his thing. I think, clearly the MPs would like him to say something that he can be tackled on, that he can be embarrassed by, that can be placed in dispute. But clearly De Ruyter's not going to fall for that, and he's going to maintain this rather closed posture. I think he spoke too much in the interview where he made these allegations, but he's certainly not going to repeat that mistake, and he's going to be very careful going forward.
Richard, we spoke to Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan here on the program, and insofar as my memory serves, he also refused to name the people that De Ruyter mentioned to him in conversations around this discussion insofar as corruption at Eskom is concerned. If either of these parties are saying, we're not going to name names, we're going to leave it to the authorities to investigate, is that where it ends? We now wait for the Hawks investigation?
Yeah, people are going to be very careful before naming senior ministers for the like. There's also a question about the nature of the investigation that led to this information, because it seems that Eskom, under de Ruyter, engaged in a private security investigation. They got money from the private sector, several million rands, and then they appointed a private investigator to have a look at this high-level corruption that was taking place in Eskom. It has become a practice to use these private investigations. Some of them are quite notorious, alleged to be publicity-seeking, some people with dubious histories and backgrounds. And I think if that is the source of this information, people are entitled to be skeptical. These guys are being paid to come with dramatic revelations. And it may well be these private investigations that have identified these senior politicians. And I think it's appropriate to exercise some caution when you look at their work.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily reliable.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. That bombshell expose by News 24 revealing that tens of millions of rands were sort of put into this off-the-books investigation into corruption at Eskom. Tony Oosthuizen, who is notorious, according to one investigative journalist, Jacques Poe, and according to a simple Google search, as an apartheid-era spy and assassin, part of this. A bit unsteady as he went into that Scopa briefing, right? Because that expose by News 24 landed just before Scopa actually sat in Parliament.
Yeah, the idea of the public sector funding, investigations into high-level crime and corruption and the like sounds really nice, but, who are you going to appoint and how are you going to do this kind of job? As I said, these agencies, in this case, I think it's George Fivez's agency, which is a little bit more reputable than most, but they have a record of making dramatic public statements as part, I think, of an attempt to kind of win business and win reputation and name. But there are definitely questions around any information that they supply. It may be good, maybe not, but they do tend to dramatize things and overplay their hand. So, I think people might be concerned about the integrity of reports that are privately funded rather than coming from the police.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, who's behind those kinds of investigations? Who are the people who are investigating? Richard Spoor, let me thank you for your time this morning. Richard is a public interest lawyer as we continue to track André de Ruyter's appearance before Scopa just yesterday.